This is the Aunty and Brain Tumours talk show. It's a show full of informative chat and inspirational messages. The Aunty and Brain Tumours talk show on podcast.
Hi, my name's Steve, and back in 2017 I was diagnosed with a meningioma brain tumour. Really, the diagnosis came after 18 months of misdiagnosis. I'd first struggled with vision, went blurry and doubled, which was kind of the first trigger that something wasn't really right. But at the same time, I was suffering kind of frontal headaches that were, normally attributed to kind of sinus issues. The vision issues kind of stuck around for a couple of weeks, despite seeing a GP and confirming it was all sinus related, usual antibiotics and some pain relief and what have you. And after that 2 weeks, nothing really improved. And like I say, this kind of went on and on. I saw different GPs, 18 months of consistent headaches, keeping me awake at night, really affecting my mood and what have you. I just sort of marched into the doctors. I was still serving in the army at the time and just sort of said, I really need to know what's going on. Fortunately, I managed to get an MRI scan, I think within a fortnight. And then the results came less than 24 hours after the scan was completed. So yeah, I was diagnosed with a meningioma on my rear sagittal sinus, which is sort of the main fluid canal that goes down the back of the head. And as a result of its position being on a main blood supply, Terry, as I call him, can't actually come out. So it was kind of, getting the diagnosis, finding out very minimal, I think, at that stage, waiting for an appointment at the John Radcliffe to get more information from a specialist, then kind of going through that roller coaster of emotions of, not really understanding what the implications of it not coming out were. And that was after kind of, the most anxious 2-week wait of your life. And then sort of talked about the options of what could or couldn't be done with the position of the tumour and the surgery related to it. But what was key was that we had to do something to release the pressure that was sort of building up in my head and sort of ready to blow. It then resulted in me being admitted to the John Radcliffe Hospital for 7 days, of which I had 3 surgical procedures, and then basically came home the day after my 3rd surgery with a pack of paracetamol. One of the things that kind of got me through recovery the other end was definitely the dark humour and the banter. Squaddies are pretty blunt to the point and a little bit savage, and I think you have to be in that type of job because it's not the sort of job where you could be a little scared wallflower, But yeah, when I finally got togged up to go in for surgery, I'd gone through what I thought was a very kind of methodical thought process of getting into the right headspace. And it may, again, sound a little bit dark, but I very quickly had people from work come in to help me update my will to make sure all my finances were in order. I was contacting my now wife to, make sure she knew where the life insurance policy was. And, I was sort of very, very process orientated to make sure that everything was in order. And then I just remember laying on the bed as I went into the anaesthetist room, just completely an emotional wreck, not knowing what the outcome was going to be. As much as the time I spent in Afghan, you didn't really know what the outcome was going to be of every patrol that you went on. You I suppose were trained for it. That's what you'd spent your whole career preparing for. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew how your weapon system worked. You knew how all your first aid procedures took effect. You just knew everything because you lived it, you breathed it. It was your career, it was your life. I sometimes struggle to explain to people what being in the army was like because until you've done it, you can't really understand, what it's all about, I guess. But yeah, for me particularly then, it was massively the unknown. I'd sat with the consultant surgeon and he had a big A3 pad of, please sign your consent form here. But in the box where it says, these are the additional, considerations or additional risks associated to your particular surgery, the guy ran out of room. He was writing up the columns. He was writing in every spare space. He'd run out of room where he had to list and tell me of every single eventuality of how this could go wrong. And it's everything from being, paralyzed from the neck down, from, losing the ability to, of strength in one particular side of your body. You might not, woke up not being able to speak. You might have had to have not been able to eat, digest. the list was endless. And I think by that point, the blood had kind of drained out of me, and I was white, clammy, sweaty. And I was just like, dude, can we just sign this and get on with it? Like, I really don't want to talk about it anymore, you know? So yeah, first surgery was a pressure valve that went in the front of my skull. It was kind of like the final check to make sure that they'd done everything necessary to tick all the boxes to say, yeah, this guy needs surgery. So I had a pressure sensor put in between the skull and the brain, which was quite odd because they sort of coiled up the spare cable on the side of my head and stitched it on. And then they plugged me into USB 2, which was, again, quite a fun thing. But yeah, woke up. I think the procedure for that one was around 45 minutes from start to finish. Woke up, as you would expect, very drowsy, quite sore. But yeah, overall, I think, yeah, not too bad at all, really. It was kind of going into the first shunt operation that was a bit more interesting when I woke up. Yeah. So yeah, the first shunt operation, again, not a particularly long surgery. I think probably less than 90 minutes. And I woke up from that feeling very, very groggy. What had transpired is they'd not quite seated the valve in the ventricle quite right for some reason. So what that was doing was basically having a negative brain pressure effect. So where previously I was recording way over, sort of safe brain pressure levels, now it was kind of plummeting the opposite direction. So yeah, from that one, I remember waking up feeling very sore. The procedure was done where you're laying on your back, but to access the area, you're kind of cranked right over. So sort of woke up with a sore neck, and obviously without being too graphic, to get from point A to point B where the shunt kind of terminates is essentially done by a long metal rod. They kind of guide through you to connect the two. So that's a bit of an experience. So you wake up feeling a bit sore, and like I said, negative brain pressure. So for that day and the day after, so yeah, that sort of 48 hours before I had a revision of that operation, I was taking morphine from a syringe and just generally felt very bad. But also the knock-on effect of having all those stomach muscles cut open to get that tube into the stomach cavity is, I suppose, sort of the equivalent type of surgery as you would expect from a cesarean section, where they're going through all the muscle and the stomach lining and what have you. So you really then do lose the ability to stand up, sit down, and all that kind of the usual stuff that you would do for yourself. So again, that was a bit of a challenge. So by the time I'm unplugging myself from USB 2, because I still had my brain monitor in the front at this point, trying to go to the toilet was somewhat of a challenge. All of a sudden, got a foreign body, crawling down your neck, across your collarbone, and down into your stomach. So yeah, it felt very tight, very sore. But also every time the valve activated, I could almost feel it pulsating. I could feel it working. So I mean, that in some respects, that's great. You're like, thanks very much, but also really odd at the same time. I don't get that now. I mean, very rarely do I sort of feel anything coming down my neck. It's sort of more, we are at one with each other now. But yeah, in the early days, yeah, it was very weird. Then I was discharged by Monday afternoon. My wife, Rebecca, throughout the whole process, she was absolutely, the rock that steadied the ship. For us, it was quite a testing time. He was living in our house in Southampton, and I was working away just outside Aylesbury, and we were planning for a wedding. We were, trying to sort of plan our lives and look at having a family and all that kind of stuff. It was quite a tough time. But yeah, and I think without leaning on her a lot, it would have been a lot tougher, definitely. My parents travelled from deepest, darkest Norfolk to come and be by my side. That was important. That was nice. I basically went back to work after a period of recovery. I think I was at home for about 3.5, 4 months. And then when I went back to work, I eventually got picked up by the medical system there, that I could actually start to get my body moving again. So I went through quite a period of physio, and it got kind of looked after by the military that way. They were John Radcliffe Hospital, rang me and said, yeah, we're not overly keen with your last scan results, so we need to get you back in and have a chat. Of course, straight away that sends you into a bit of a tiz, because again, you've got a tumour that can't come out. What's next? And yeah, we talked about radiotherapy, but I made sure that this time I postponed everything until after, significant holidays and what have you. So yeah, came back and I had quite a high dosage of radiotherapy, but in a short time frame. So from what I remember, I think I pretty much got the maximum dose that I could have, and I had that across a 3-day period, I think it was. So I was kind of in there. I had all the face mask molds and all that sort of thing done. And I think I had 3 sessions of 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And yeah, I mean, that's been great so far. I mean, the results that have come back off of that have been really good. So I think the sort of scan cycle after surgery, I think I started at 3 monthly and then out to 6 months and then out to a year eventually. The scan I had in February 24 was the first scan I'd had at a 2-year interval. That came back again, all looking good. There was some reasonable reduction in the size of the tumour. So now I've got to wait 3 years for a scan. And by the time I get to that point, I'll be 10 years post-surgery. And if everything is still behaving itself at that point, I'll get pushed on to a 5-year scan cycle for the rest of my life there. So I did struggle massively from anxiety and depression from my diagnosis. Obviously, there was a period of diagnosis, then a couple of weeks wait to get the actual specialist report. And yeah, it was a really dark time. I ended up in counselling through the military. So we've got our own, or I say we, I'm not in the army anymore, but the army's got its own kind of mental health specialists. So I effectively had counselling for about 18 months after that, and that proved really, really valuable. I mean, I did join like a local brain tumour community that had like coffee mornings and stuff, but found that kind of had the opposite effect that I wanted it to. So I wanted it to be like a really positive experience to go and share with other people and see like-minded people and, take a bit of comfort from it. But actually there were some people there that were, really, really poorly. So it kind of didn't really help me. It just made me feel a bit worse. I think a bit of guilt kicked in because I was probably like the healthiest bloke in the room. And, there were some people in there with some serious issues. And yeah, so I kind of parked that. But yeah, I kept with my counselling for about 18 months. My advice would definitely be, you definitely need to seek support. Support is the big one, whether it's familiar faces or strangers in a sort of counselling setting or whatever. But for me particularly, I found getting over the macho bravado of being a squaddy and being a bloke. We're not really good at talking about our feelings and stuff. Getting over that hurdle and actually just letting it all out, having a good cry in front of someone who's never met you before is always like a really awkward first date. But yeah, just having people to talk to, having people that don't really know what you're going through, but just are happy to listen. Because it is a very, for me particularly, it was a very dark time. The depression and anxiety kind of really took over my life for a good 18 months, 2 years. You need people to help you. You need people to help get through that. It's not something you can fight on your own, because otherwise you would just simply give in, and let your demons take over, and you just end up down a deeper, darker black hole, and it just wouldn't do you any favors, Then you start to look into some of the statistics around how many people are affected, the level of funding that's provided by the government, which is disgustingly shocking, by the way. And, it was kind of like, well, what can I do to help some of these people that were in a far worse position than I was? So I reached out to brain tumor research, started to do a little bit of PR stuff for them, again, shared my story, and then started taking on kind of coastal walk challenges and bits and pieces. Raised about £4,000-5,000 before COVID came along. Then kind of turned to the internet to try and be a little bit more entrepreneurial, and what can I do during lockdown to spin a few quid and make some money for this charity while I can't physically go out and do a lot because I was shielding. And I think through selling kind of pin badges and a few other bits and bobs, I raised about £6,000 in lockdown. Then went back post-lockdown and did a few more walks. So yeah, I think in total now I'm up to kind of £14,000, which I'm told all pretty much near as damn it funds a whole week of brain tumour research in one of their specialist facilities. So that's great news. I mean, scary that it is that expensive, but great news that I've been able to help out in the way that I have. So I went to put my first tile at the Centre of Excellence in Plymouth, which is kind of the home for meningioma research. And again, you kind of get the guided tour. You understand what they do and how they do it. And obviously, yeah, that's kind of the appreciation of why it costs so much. But then just kind of really hits home that it's such a shocking, sad state of affairs that so little of government funding goes into this type of cancer research.
This is the Aunty and Brain Tumours talk show. It's a show full of informative chat and inspirational messages. The Aunty and Brain Tumours talk show on podcast.